Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the critical situation that's unfolding in Iran. We're talking about massive protests, a brutal crackdown, and now it's blown up into this incredibly tense international standoff. So let's unpack the recent reporting and see how we got to this point. So let's kick things off with this really stark warning from the US president. I mean, this one statement basically took a national crisis and just catapulted it onto the world stage. It became a global standoff and it put everyone on high alert. All right, so to really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. First, we'll look at the life on the line that sparked this whole thing. Then we'll get into the government's crackdown and the internet blackout. After that, we have to talk about the human cost. The numbers are just staggering. Then there's the war of words heating up, and finally, we'll dig into why all of this is even happening in the first place. Okay, so let's start with the person who's right at the heart of that presidential threat. We're talking about a young man whose personal story suddenly and tragically became a global headline. This is him, Irfan Sultani. He's just 26 years old. And his case, well, it really became a symbol for this entire movement after his family spoke out. They told reporters he was picked up during the protests, and now he's facing execution after this incredibly, unbelievably fast legal process. And just look at how fast this all happened. I mean, a relative of Sultani's told the BBC that the death sentence came down in what they called an extremely rapid process. We're talking just 2 days. 2 days from being detained to being sentenced to death. It's just wild. Yeah, and that speed, it's pretty much unheard of. This quote from the Henga Organization for Human Rights really drives that point home. They're basically saying, we've never seen a case move this quickly. It just shows you how extraordinary the situation is for protesters like Sultani. So this all leads to a really crucial question, right? How exactly is the Iranian government trying to handle all this unrest? And the answer is, well, it's a two-front war. One on the streets and another one online. So what are they doing? Well, the authorities have rolled out this multi-layered strategy. You've got deadly force and mass arrests to clear people off the streets, but at the exact same time, they've slammed the door shut on the internet, a near total blackout. They're even setting up roadside checkpoints to go through people's phones. It's a full-on physical and digital lockdown. And the scale of that digital blockade, wow. We're talking over 132 hours of internet shutdown. Think about that. It makes it almost impossible for people inside the country to talk to each other, or for the rest of us on the outside to get a clear picture of what's really going on. And you know, this whole crackdown, it isn't just about squashing the protests happening right now. According to one human rights rep, the real goal is to make sure no more protests can even start in the future. It's a strategy of fear, really, a preemptive strike against dissent. So even with this information blackout, some numbers on the human cost are starting to leak out from both human rights groups and, surprisingly, even some officials. And yeah, the numbers don't exactly match up, but they all paint the same incredibly grim picture. Just take a look at these reports on the death toll. They're conflicting for sure, but they are both staggering. On one hand, you have Harana, that's the human rights activists' news agency, reporting over 2,400 killed. Then you have an Iranian official telling Reuters it's closer to 2,000 and blaming it all on terrorists. It really shows you there's an information war happening right alongside the fight in the streets. Let's just pause on that number from Irana for a second. Over 2,400 protesters confirmed killed. And that figure includes at least 12 children. It's just a devastating toll. And it's amazing that a rights group was able to track this so carefully despite the blackout. And it's not just the deaths. The number of arrests is absolutely massive. More than 18,000 people arrested. You know, a number that big suggests this is a sweeping effort, not just to stop the protests, but to completely take the entire movement apart, piece by piece.
The few eyewitness accounts that are managing to filter out of the country, they paint a truly horrific picture. Like this message from a doctor in Tehran who basically says the hospitals are like war zones. They're running out of supplies, running out of blood, just completely overwhelmed by the number of casualties.
And listen to this. It's a harrowing quote from an activist at a morgue. It really shows you the grim reality that families are facing right now. He describes this awful system where they've piled up bodies based on what neighborhood they're from, and families have to go to their address pile and search through it for their loved ones. He says you don't know a fraction of the level of violence that's been used. Just unbelievable.
Okay, so while all this is happening on the ground, the war of words between Tehran and Washington is just exploding. It's reaching a total fever pitch, with both sides throwing out threats and accusations. President Trump, for his part, went straight to social media to talk directly to the protesters, promising them that help was on the way. And he ended his message with MIGA, which stands for Make Iran Great Again. It's obviously a play on his own MAGA slogan, and it was also a nod to a phrase used by some in the opposition. So how did Iran respond? Well, the Iranian government basically framed these statements not as some kind of support for human rights, but as the U.S. setting the stage for war. They accused the U.S. of manufacturing a pretext to come in with military force. Meanwhile, back inside Iran, the judiciary is pulling out its most powerful legal weapons. Prosecutors have started charging some of these protesters with enmity against God. It's a national security offense, and it carries the death penalty. So that brings us to the big question: why? What drove so many people into the streets to begin with? What was the spark for what's become one of the biggest challenges to the establishment since the 1979 revolution? Well, it all started with the economy. The first spark was just pure anger over the currency collapsing and the cost of living going through the roof. But from there, it just exploded. It quickly turned into this huge political movement demanding fundamental change, and it spread like wildfire to 180 cities all across the country. And you can actually hear that evolution in the slogans people were chanting in the streets. You know, it went from being about economic problems to directly challenging the leadership. You started hearing things like "death to the dictator," and even chants that referenced the old monarchy before the revolution. So, all of this leaves us with a massive critical question. You've got this international rhetoric at a boiling point. You've got thousands of lives hanging in the balance. So when that internet blackout finally lifts, what's the full story that's going to come pouring out? And maybe more importantly, what are the consequences going to be?